Right now, whether you like it or not, you are worth exactly 250 people. Not metaphorically. Not metaphorically. A man built an entire career on that exact number, and Guinness World Record still lists him as the greatest salesman who ever lived. Over 15 years, before the internet, before social media, before a single online review existed anywhere, averaging 6 cars a day, every single business day, for 15 straight years, and the actual secret behind all of it has almost nothing to do with cars. His name was Joe Girard, and before any of this, he was nobody's idea of a success story. He grew up poor in Detroit, shined shoes on the street at 9 years old, delivered newspapers at 11, dropped out of high school, grew up, worked as a stove assembler, then spent over a decade as a building contractor, getting fired more than once along the way. By the time he walked into a Chevrolet dealership asking for a sales job, he was 35, broke, and had nothing that looked like a plan. He didn't even keep his birth name for the job. Girardi became Girard, a small, deliberate choice about how strangers would see him, made before he'd sold a single thing. That instinct thinking hard about how another person experiences you before they've said a word turns out to be the whole story. So, what did a broke 35-year-old, twice fired guy figure out that nobody else at that dealership knew? His own book breaks it into a handful of specific moves. None of them make sense, though, until you understand the one number he built all of them on top of. Early in his career, Girard got talking to a funeral director who'd come in to buy a car. Out of curiosity, Girard asked him how many people usually show up to the average funeral. The director didn't even pause. About 250, he said. A few months later, at a relative's wedding, Girard ended up next to the catering manager and asked the same kind of question a different way. Around 250, roughly half from each side. Two completely different events. Two strangers with no reason to coordinate an answer. The same number, twice. Girard's takeaway was blunt. The average person, over the course of their life, stays meaningfully connected to about 250 other people. Enough to fill a funeral, enough to fill a wedding. And every one of those 250 will eventually hear about you, good or bad, from the one person who actually dealt with you directly. The cosmetics entrepreneur Mary Kay Ash landed on almost the identical idea from a completely different direction. She used to tell her own sales force to imagine every person they met wearing an invisible sign reading, "Make me feel important," because that instinct, more than any script or discount, is what actually gets people to buy. Same math. Funerals and wedding halls instead of makeup counters. So back to you. For a second. That math doesn't care what you sell or whether you sell anything at all. You are currently one bad interaction away from 250 people hearing about it. You're also one good one away from the same 250 hearing that instead. Once Girard believed that in his bones, he built his whole career on 5 specific moves. Here's the first one because it answers the most obvious objection. Fine, but how do you actually treat 250 strangers well enough that they'd bother repeating it? Lesson 1. Make the customer a winner. Most salespeople, Girard noticed, secretly think their customers are a waste of time tire kickers who wander in with nothing better to do and leave without buying. And most customers, meanwhile, walk in already braced for a fight, assuming the guy in the tie is one bad decision away from talking them into something they don't need. Both sides show up expecting an enemy, and when both sides expect an enemy, Girard said, that's exactly what they get. His fix wasn't a script, it was a full reframe. Your job isn't to win money off the customer, it's to make sure that when they walk out, whether they buy or not, they feel like they won something, that they were treated like a friend, not a mark. Because here's where it connects straight back to the number from a minute ago. A customer who feels like a winner talks to 250 people about how good that felt. A customer who feels handled talks to the same 250 people about that instead, fixing how you see the customer solves half the problem. But it doesn't answer the purely tactical question every salesperson eventually slams into. Once your friends, family, and neighbors have all already bought from you, where do you find the next customer? This is where it gets genuinely strange. Lesson 2. Turn total strangers into customers. When Girard ran out of people he actually knew, he started calling strangers off a list. And here's the problem with that. About 99% of people on a cold call list do not want to talk to a salesman. He started calling for exactly one thing, a reference. Here's exactly how the trick worked. He'd dial a number, a wife would pick up, and he'd say something like, "Hi, this is Joe at the Chevrolet dealership. Your car's ready. When are you coming to pick it up?" Confused, she'd say they hadn't ordered a car. He'd apologize, say he must have the wrong Steven, wrong house. But right before hanging up, he'd ask one more thing. almost as an afterthought. Any chance you or your husband are thinking about a new car at all? Half annoyed, half charmed that he'd bothered to ask politely. She'd usually give him something her husband's name, roughly when they might be in the market, sometimes even a rough budget. He wrote every detail in a file. Months later, when that window actually opened up, he wasn't a stranger cold calling out of nowhere anymore. He was the guy who already spoke to your wife. Beyond the phone, he mailed something to every customer 12 times a year, once a month, forever, and it was never a pitch, a birthday note, a holiday card. Nothing to buy, nothing to click. Just his name, landing in someone's mailbox 12 separate times a year, being the one predictable, friendly piece of mail in a stack of bills. And then there are the business cards. Girard handed them out constantly, but the detail that actually explains his whole instinct is what he'd do at a football game. The instant his team scored and the entire stadium jumped up cheering, he'd throw a fistful of his own business cards straight up into the crowd right at the one moment when everyone around him was already looking up, already smiling, already in the single best mood of the day to notice something with his name on it falling out of the sky. Getting a stranger to pick up the phone or notice your card in a crowd is one problem. Getting them to actually say yes once they're standing in front of you is a completely different skill, and this next one is the strangest move in the whole book. Lesson 3: Sell the smell. Girard almost never described a car's features during a test drive. He'd hand the customer the keys, put them in the driver's seat, and mostly just stay quiet. Because a quiet customer, alone with a new car, starts selling it to themselves. They notice the smell of the new upholstery. They notice how solid the door sounds when it shuts. They start narrating their own life back to themselves, where they'd park it, who'd see them in it. And when the customer asked where to drive, Girard's answer was always the same: wherever you want. If they lived nearby, he'd gently suggest driving right past their own house, not for directions. So a neighbor on the porch, or their own kids in the yard, would see them behind the wheel of a car they didn't own yet, even for 30 seconds. Because the moment another human being sees you with something, some part of you already wants to keep it. That single tactic will get most people most of the way to a yes. But there's a quieter, far less glamorous discipline problem that kills more salespeople than any bad pitch ever could. Lesson 4: Stay out of the gossip club. Every workplace has one. A cluster of people standing around the break room or the showroom floor talking about nothing for hours every single day. Girard called it the gossip club, and his rule about it was simple: don't join it. Not because talking to coworkers is bad, because time spent gossiping is time not spent finding your next 250 people. His logic was blunt: whatever you sell, this is your business, and the only thing that actually grows a business is the work you put in while everyone else is standing around the coffee machine. And then there's the one rule in this entire book that sounds on the surface like it contradicts everything Girard just taught you. Lesson 5: Use honesty wisely. Girard's own words on this were careful. Honesty is a policy, not a law. Most of the time, tell the exact truth, especially about anything a customer can independently check. Lie about how many cylinders are under the hood, and he'll count the wires himself, catch you in 5 minutes, and tell all 250 of his people about it. But, and this is the part people either love or get genuinely uneasy about, Girard admitted he'd sometimes stretch the truth to get a customer through the door. If someone called asking whether a specific model was in stock, he'd often just say yes, before even checking, because between his own lot and the small network of dealers who quietly traded inventory with each other, he could usually make it true by the time they arrived. Is that fully honest? Depends who you ask. Girard's own line was that it's a policy, something you bend around, getting a real human being in front of you, not a rule you follow off a cliff. Make of that what you will. But it's the most argued over page in the whole book, and probably a big part of why people are still summarizing it decades later. Strip away all 5 of those, and they're really just one idea, said 5 different ways. Assume the person in front of you is about to go tell 250 other people exactly how you made them feel. Girard died in 2019 at 90 years old. Guinness eventually retired the most cars sold category entirely, after another salesman's claim to have beaten the record fell into a dispute that never got fully resolved, which means, depending on how you look at it, Joe Girard may just hold that record forever. You almost certainly aren't trying to sell 13,000 cars, but the math he built his whole life on doesn't care what you're selling: a product, a resume, an idea. There are 250 people on the other side of every interaction you have. If this changed how you think about your last interaction with someone, a customer, a coworker, anyone, tell me about it in the comments. I read them before deciding what to summarize next.